The last aspect of being formed for mystery that I want to explore is the mysterious character of God and being formed in that image. How being formed in that image gives us great resilience. I don't think anyone would argue with the fact that it's been hard over the last few years. With a global pandemic as well as social upheaval, the landscape has been one marked by the fog of an unknown future. This fog descends on any of us when a loved one dies, or we receive a troubling medical diagnosis, or one remains elusive. When the plans for our future fall apart and the path forward suddenly closes in. In these challenging moments, leaning on the certainty of traditional doctrines and assurances may seem like the right response to the shifting sand and the descending fog, but I want to offer instead that the identification with God's mystery expands our capacity for resilience. Resilience can be defined as the ability to bounce back, or the capacity to find meaning even in the midst of difficulties. We all know people who seem to have this mysterious capacity to withstand the storms of life. And we know that they're resilient, not because they've always had smooth sailing, but because they've weathered the storms. We can't remove the presence of storms. Simply having a positive attitude will not change our circumstances. But resilience is when, in the midst of storms, we have a deep well of character from which to draw. Let me give you an example of what I'm proposing. Scripture tells us that God is love, but I've experienced that idea held in very different ways. When the love of God is held as a distant, unmovable certainty, it may be experienced as a firm foundation, at least until something happens that challenges what you've always held true. But when the world no longer feels like a beautiful and loving place, what happens? You can probably fill in the particulars of this sentence in your own life or the life of your loved ones. Why did that happen? How can a loving God allow it? In contrast, when God is love is held as the characteristic of a personal and mysterious God, then when blessing in your life happens, God's love is present in celebration. And when you're grieving, the love of comfort draws near. When you mess up, we have to admit we all miss the mark sometimes. Then the loving God of grace and forgiveness conducts surgery and spreads a healing balm. These experiences of God's personal and mysterious love are much more complex than declaring a statement that God is love. As I've grown older, I am much more comfortable bringing my whole self to a complex and mysterious God. Over the last several years, I've been bringing the ups and downs of my life to this mysterious God through spiritual direction sessions, and a recurring invitation from Jesus has been to enter imaginatively into the gospel story of Jesus asleep in the boat while the disciples navigate a storm. Do you remember that one? The first time that it came up, I found myself entering into the narrative and confronting Jesus with accusation. How dare you sleep while it's storming all around me? And after receiving the loving gaze of Christ in the face of this accusation, I was able to acknowledge the complexities of the storms of my life. Another time, when the boat in the storm appeared in a spiritual direction session, I was weary instead of angry. And although I knew there was a storm in life, I had nothing left. Instead of Jesus coming and calming the storm to allow me peace, I felt Jesus call me to stop gazing at the storm, to leave that to the other disciples, let them pilot us home, and to come, curl up next to the slumbering Jesus. What a comforting grace it was to be invited to acknowledge the storm and yet feel free or even compelled to rest. If my spiritual journey is to be formed into the likeness of Christ, then the complexity of the personal reactions I receive from Jesus in the face of different circumstances has helped me bring my whole self into his presence. Nothing's out of bounds. Nothing is beyond transformation. The mystery of how the Spirit whispers in my ear, or Jesus enters my imagination, or Creator can be depended upon, opens up the horizons of possibility for facing the complexity of life.